Most of the 20th century can be neatly parceled into three distinct eras: World War I, World War II, and the Cold War era. At the end of the Cold War, despite efforts to craft a new world order, after the formal collapse of America's great enemy, the Soviet Union, in December 1991, no label describing that order has stuck. We still define the era in which we live now against the era that preceded it, the post-Cold War world. Whereas the great wars of the last century were decisively turned by the intervention of the United States, since the end of the Cold War, American interventions, military, economic, or diplomatic, have had rather more mixed impacts. Increasing global complexities make foreign policy more difficult. This, according to the argument, goes some way to explaining the patchy performance of U.S. presidents in foreign affairs for over 3 decades. None seemed to grasp that the world had shifted. Each devised a label for the world he inherited. None succeeded in making it permanent. The most obvious example is the War on Terror, actually a war on Islam, invented by President George W. Bush in response to an event of unambiguous clarity, even if of disputed meaning, the terrorist attacks of September the 11th, 2001. The label itself has never commanded a consensus. Too reductive war cannot be made on a tactic too easily construed as a war on Islam. Paints a gray world in black and white. President Barack Obama never spoke of a war on terror even as he continued to wage it, killing more Muslims than his predecessor. European allies preferred an engaged America to a detached one. How did America cope with such a world? 2 decades after the Cold War ended, American capitalism looked far from triumphant, as the Great Recession, which took hold in 2008, was evidence. The Cold War cast a shadow on the presidents who came after it. They did not always have to be aware of operating within that shadow. Indeed, several claimed to have moved beyond it, but it nevertheless conditioned how they made foreign policy, the way they did, and why. President George Bush and Boris Yeltsin shake hands at their first meeting in 1992 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Success came more from adapting to that shadow than from attempts to escape it. When the strategic lessons of the Cold War were applied, presidents fared better. When they were forgotten, they fared worse. Despite the initial rhetoric of George H.W. Bush, the president at the end of the Cold War, his foreign policy ultimately failed to transcend that conflict. Similarly, Bill Clinton's efforts to abandon what he called the old thinking of the Cold War were short-lived. He came to rely on Cold War strategies, like containment, in the case of Iraq, and institutions like NATO to craft his foreign policy legacy. George W. Bush, despite the drama of 9/11s, waged a war on Muslims with powerful analogies to the war on communism. Barack Obama, in a world divided along Cold War lines. Donald Trump, like so many presidents before him, made Russia central to his foreign policy, and was determined to contain Chinese power. It would be remarkable if these leaders, nurtured in the Cold War, were not susceptible to its strategic lessons. It is more remarkable still to suppose that the foreign policy establishment and personnel of the American government could as quickly forget them. While the world was in many ways different after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the response of the United States to this new world order was essentially unaltered. To understand U.S. foreign policy after the Cold War, our essential lens is the Cold War itself.